Oh, good morning, everyone. While we're trying to fix some of the technical issues that we are having, thank you for joining us here today. We are going to be talking about the credit cane, basically the Fair Credit Reporting Act, credit reports, and scores. In light of COVID-19, with the shutdowns and people out of work and people missing payments, there's going to be a lot of issues with credit reporting, credit scores, and hopefully this presentation will give you some information as to what to look for and how to protect yourself and your credit scores. Today, I'm gonna have special guest speaker, Paul Herman, who is a credit reporting guru. He has done this for many, many years. He goes around the country and I apologize. I was looking at a question, and yes, this will be recorded, but Paul goes around the country and he actually teaches other attorneys and people how to handle these types of situations. As a preliminary matter, I want everybody to understand that this does not create an attorney-client relationship. This is not confidential. It is not to be construed as legal advice. Every situation is different. And if you need advice on your situation, you have to discuss that with an attorney or someone who knows what they're talking about, so that you know what's going on with your own situation. And yes, this is being recorded and it will be shared. I seem to have lost Paul, so please give me 1 minute.
I had to switch over from from my desktop to my laptop. Thank God, I had it sitting right here. My apologies to everyone.
No problem. So I've done an introduction.
Okay.
And we can go straight into the presentation.
Great. Good morning, everybody. And again, my apologies. I hope you don't mind the background of the palm trees. If you're not in Florida, don't get jealous. Real quickly, so Tanya kind of mentioned to you that I've had some background for a number of years in doing credit reports and representing people that have debt and credit related issues. I started real quickly, my background is in workers' comp, Florida workers' comp, federal workers' comp. In 2005, I left my firm I was a partner in. I joined up with two guys that used to work for me, and we did consumer law, and they owned a credit repair company. And actually, we got a call from a friend of ours that was a claimant attorney, and he said, hey, look, I got these clients that have this stuff on their credit report with regard to medical bills. Can you help us out? And it kind of got us involved in really investigating it to the point where we ended up filing enough federal lawsuits, because you have to file it under the in federal court. And we had more cases pending against TransUnion than anybody in the country. And at one point we were able to handle a lot of high volume by doing a lot of negotiation, in the sense that once we got into the litigation stage, when we had the multiple parties that were defendants, including the credit reporting agencies, we worked out a nice deal with them where we were almost, their credit repair company became a vendor of TransUnion. We ended up speaking in front of about 3,000 TransUnion vendors in Las Vegas, and really had an insight in terms of how everything was being done. Credit reporting went through a metamorphosis in 2008, 2009. And really everything that started was the Fair Credit Reporting Act. You may have heard of it, FCRA. In reality, it's been changed. It's now called FACTA. It's the Fair and Accurate Credit Transaction Act. It was changed in 2003. Essentially the same information contained in there with some minor changes. And then the numbers that you reference in terms of sections are different. So that's a little background on that. And Tanya, you can kind of flip through the, if you want, you can just flip through the screen. A lot of the stuff on the materials is something that you can read on your own. It's really pretty basic. And what I wanted to do was concentrate on the things that make a difference. Credit reporting is, as we know, something that is relevant in our lives, maybe as much, if not more so, than a social security number. And what your credit score is, and everybody gets hung up on the credit score. So we have, first, let's understand what we're dealing with, and then let's figure out ways that we can actually utilize it and improve for our clients, for our business, for what makes a difference. And then ultimately, what we have at our disposal as attorneys and representing people is, I like to call it the break glass in case of emergency, and that's when you're talking about litigation and what we need to build up a decent case for litigation. So first things first, with regard to your credit, it's relevant for everything involving insurance. If you're trying to rent an apartment or a house, jobs, everything that you can think of, your credit score makes a difference. We had a client one time that had some dings on his report, and he had the highest level of security. He was with the Air Force and flew planes where they were stationed in Iceland. And he was responsible for flying some of the top senators in Congress that he was on 24-hour call to get to Iceland, to take the planes, to take them out in the event of an emergency, nuclear blast, whatever it was. And his score was relevant because the concern is that if somebody has debt and they owe money, just like salacious pictures that can be used to try and influence or bribe someone, owing money to people is something that could be something they could use against you in the event that you have a job or you're trying to get a job. So it makes a difference with that regard. So there are certain things. You can go next slide if you don't mind. What happens is there's certain things that you have rights as a consumer, and understand certain phraseology that you have to know. There's consumers, then there's the credit reporting agencies or CRAs. Then you have what's called furnishers of information. A furnisher of information is the entity that submits information to FICO, the Fair Isaac company, and FICO is the place that consolidates all the information. So it's not like a furnisher of information, which could be a bank, could be a debt collector. It's someone who deals a lot in credit, whether it's credit lending or collection. It's not like you or I owe you a debt and you're going to report me to the credit bureau because I owe you money as consumer to consumer or even to business. You can't go and report me on something because, number one, if it's a business debt, it's not reported on your personal credit report, which is critical. And number two, if you're not in the business of dealing with that on a regular basis, you're not going to have access to report something on my credit report, my consumer or personal credit report. And there's a reason for that, because that information is so valuable, and because also credit reporting is considered debt collection. Debt collectors utilize it on a regular basis. They send you a letter, you owe money on a credit card, you don't pay, whatever else it is. They can always go and file suit if they choose to, or they can put it on a credit report. Now, the difference is, if I'm attempting to collect a debt and it's a personal debt, I have, in certain states, different time frames. In Georgia, I have 3 years to collect before the statute of limitations comes in. I can no longer avail myself of the courts to collect the debt, but I could put it on a credit report that's going to be on there for 7 years. So understand that any derogatory information is going to be on a credit report for no longer than 7 years. The bureaus are required to remove it after that time, and typically they don't do it on their own. If you dispute it, they will remove it, assuming that 7 years has lapsed. Only thing that's different is bankruptcies is anywhere between 7 to 10 years. A bankruptcy can be reported. All right, next slide, if you don't mind. So, so the understanding of what we're doing, and go ahead, next slide. So you have consumer reporting agencies. By the way, you're entitled to one free credit report every year by law. So you can go on to, and there's three major credit bureaus: Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. They each have a website.
Paul, I'm sorry. I'm going to stop you there just for a second. We have a question that says, when is it 10 years as opposed to 7 years for the bankruptcies?
It's 10 years, I believe it is, with regard to a Chapter 11. Chapter 11 is a reorganization. The difference, Chapter 7 is you're wiping out all the debt, you owe nothing. A Chapter 11 is you're going for bankruptcy protection, and it's a 5-year period where the bankruptcy trustee makes a determination as to payment of the bills, whacking it up to different creditors and pocketing the rest. It's a 5-year plan, so it's typically longer on something like that. It's really not set in stone, and a lot of times it has extended beyond the 7 years. Understand something though with regard to bankruptcy, real quick, side note. If you're trying to buy a car, a bankruptcy that is old, more than say 4 or 5 years, is not something they like. And the reason for that is because you can literally default on their loan again and potentially file for another bankruptcy within the time frame that you have the payments due. Whereas the housing market is going to look at a old bankruptcy as something that you've recovered and maybe you've reestablished your credit. Whereas if it's a recent bankruptcy, they're not going to like it. And yet a car dealership is going to say, fine, because we know that if you default on the car, we can always chase you down, you can't run. So effectively, one man's ceiling is another man's floor when it comes to something like that. But as far as reporting goes, it's you start disputing it at 7 years, and typically it will come off. It will never stay on longer than 10, and those are kind of extenuating circumstances. So with regard to tax liens also, by the way, are 7 years from the date they're paid. Now, the date is critical because the date is calculated on the date of default. And I'm going to get back to the credit bureaus in a second, but the date of default is a date that my bill is due today. I owe Bank of America my payment today. I default on it. I don't pay it. So my default actually starts 30 days from now because it's due today, but I'm not really in default until 30 days. So a lot of times they have the dates mixed up because on a credit report, a date of default a lot of times is used as to the date that it's charged off. A credit card gets charged off after 90 days by law. If there's 90 days of no activity and continual default, and it'll show in a credit report, you'll have what's called the 30-day late, a 60-day late, a 90-day late. After that, it's a shutdown because now by law, they have to charge off the account. You can no longer reinvigorate that account. If I'm 30 days late, I pay a penalty for being 30 days late, and I have a knock on my credit report for that information. But the account is still open. I still have the active use of that card. But if 90 days lapses, that's it. I cannot, refurbish that account. It's kind of like a mortgage. I could be late over a period of time. After 90 days, they can claim everything is due and owing, and they can shut down the monthly payments, and now you owe the full amount. So there's a day of reckoning. When the day of reckoning comes, a lot of times they use that as the date of default. That's not accurate. So a lot of times we have to go back and dispute and say it's 3 months prior to that. It makes a difference because in some cases, let's say on an account that's being collected by a debt collector A picks it up. Now it may be reported that they're now starting to report to the credit bureau, and they're using the date of purchase.
Paul, you just got stuck. Let me see. Paul, if you can hear me, maybe you can shut off your video. That sometimes helps with the internet. Wow.
So when we were talking about the credit bureaus, the three credit bureaus, Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax, each one has its own website. Each one is typically you're entitled to one free credit report per year, not the score, the report. You have to pay to get the score, whether it's just from the one bureau or from all three bureaus, which is called a tri-merge report. It's typically $27 to get all the scores. You can also go to creditkarma.com, KARMA.com. You will get your updated information from Equifax and TransUnion for free with scores for both bureaus all the time. It's not the most accurate site. There's sometimes yes, sometimes no, because it's secondhand, but I use it all the time. It allows me to see what my clients have. It's free, so they can set up a free account. And on top of it, you're able to see, it gives you kind of meters as to what is impacting your score and what isn't. They just passed a law or just shoved a law through with regard to credit reporting that because of the coronavirus situation, everyone is entitled to get one free credit report per week. Every week you can get on Equifax, Experian, or TransUnion, or annual credit report, or freecreditreport.com, and you should be entitled to get a copy of your credit report for free. Again, not with scores, but just information so you can kind of track things. So, again, we talked about furnishers of information. And furnishers of information are relevant because those are the debt collectors and creditors that report to the bureaus. They send their information to FOSCR, and that situation is where they send it. It's called what we call an automated dispute verification form. They submit information. You open an account, they update the information. You dispute an account, they respond with the ACDV. It's simple form. They just fill in certain blanks. Maybe let's say there's 30 spots for them to put information in, and they upload it in the system one time. So that means that TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian are all sharing the same information from the same source, FICO, and they get it, and it's synthesized into there. So you would think that if everybody gets the same information, that information should in fact be the same for all credit bureaus. That's not the case. Now, why? I don't know. There's certain circumstances. I'll give you an example of what transpired. And just so you know, 79 to 80% of all credit reports have a material misrepresentation or error, meaning that something that impacts a score. It could be nominally 1 point, 2 points, whatever, but it's still impacting the score. It's not like a wrong address or the wrong spelling of a name or something like that. And the reason for that is because they're dealing with millions and millions and millions of accounts and information and what have you. So they're basically given what I like to call a legal mulligan. If you know anything about golf, you hit a shot into the woods or into the water or a schlub shot or whatever, they've taken a mulligan and you hit it over as if it never counted. Credit bureaus are entitled to make mistakes, and they don't get called out on them until ultimately there's a dispute down the line. So the information could be all screwed up, and it happens quite a bit for a variety of reasons. So what happens is the information gets uploaded from the original creditor or from the furnisher of information, and it gets put in. Each one of these bureaus, though, they synthesize it differently. For example, TransUnion is known as being the credit bureau that the auto industry goes to for their information. Equifax was known for the housing market. Why? I don't know. But you got to remember, there are three separate companies. They all play by the same rule. Think of it as three football teams in the National Football League. They are all interested in maintaining what is right for the league, but they are still extremely competitive themselves when they play each other. You know, the Bears and the Packers, you know, they're all in it for the NFL, but when they play each other, they want to tear their heads off, and that's the way it works. They're vying for additional business. So And then again, you have other credit bureaus, other ones. I know that there's some that the housing market uses all the time, some that are used in employment, what have you. You know, they're ancillary. But other than the big three, that's where it comes from. So all the same information, they synthesize it. I had a situation where I was representing a football player that he's actually in the Hall of Fame and played for the Tampa Bay Bucks. And he had a house and he paid off a mortgage, $3.2 million payoff. Everything was clean. I mean, you have something like that in your credit report, it's going to increase your score dramatically. But he had a big falling out at his bank, and they did not like him. So they chose not to report this mortgage, and it was hurting his score dramatically. Now you say, well, why didn't they? Because by law, they're not required to. The law only protects against what is reported. It cannot force them into reporting something if they choose not to. That's relevant because you can't force somebody into putting something on, positive or negative. So what we're doing is always striving to take off the negative, if at all possible, and hope that the positive either gets on there or stays on. You never want to, you know, if I have a credit card that's 20 years old, I always tell people, and this is a relevant thing to tell, do not take a credit card and just let it go, lapse, not pay for it, close it out. If it's positive, keep it. You know, stick it in a drawer. Use it every couple of months to buy a shirt, a dinner, you know, Uber Eats, whatever it is. Create some activity so it stays in a positive light because you never want to lose positive. You want to keep positive. You want to get rid of the negative information if at all possible. So
just one thing with the credit cards, if you don't use them for a year, they will more likely than not automatically be closed. So you don't want to do that either because when they close, they affect your credit report negatively. So just
right.
like Paul said, try to use it every few months just to keep it going so it doesn't close on you.
Now, I'll give you two other tricks with regard to cards. And if you're somebody that is vigilant with regard to credit, or recommendations to people that are vigilant, is number one, having a card, you want to use it, but you don't want to pay it off in full. Remember, the value of credit is to determine your credit worthiness. So think of it like this. The credit bureaus that come up with scores, they are, and the banks that lend money, they are like drug dealers. They want you to use their product, but they don't want you to become so addicted that you literally are begging for, you know, drugs in the street and you're not, and it impacts your job and you can't pay them anymore. They want you to be vigilant. There's a fine line, you know, between overextending yourself and maxing out your cards and having your card as zero. So you never want to pay a card. I use $50 on this. Don't pay $50. Pay $25. It's going to mean that you're going to pay a little interest, and it's carried over for a month. That's fine. That's the vig. It's kind of like, here's a doggy treat. You know, leave me alone so I can eat my dinner. I do that to my dogs. You know, here's a treat. Leave me alone. Same deal. It's a nominal amount, but it also shows creditworthiness and that you understand the credit game. And number two is, in the course of making payments, if you can at all do it where instead of paying once a month, you can make nominal payments a couple of times a month, every couple of weeks. It shows when they're looking down and scanning down your list and you have black items and red items in terms of activity. You know, it's kind of like looking at your own account statement for your bank account. There's a lot going out and there's a couple of things going in. If I can increase the positive coming in, here's $20 here, here's another 40. My monthly minimum balance is $90. Okay, so let me pay 40 here or 50 here or 50 here. It's easier to digest, but it also looks better. So there's a way of using credit to your advantage by showing that you know how to use it, you're willing to use it, you're actively using it, but you're also vigilant in making sure that you don't go overboard. You don't have that weekend binge, you know. I'm the dealer and I'm saying, here, you know, you want to buy this and everything else, and then I'll see you Monday, and then you don't show up Monday and say, oh, I had such a bender over the weekend, I could barely get out of bed. No. Those are warning signs. That's what's called the 30-day late. That shows, hey, you know, now, with regard to how a credit score is calculated, and they're different numbers and everything else. The bottom line is always changing. At one point, the floor was about 630, 640, with a 50% debt to credit ratio. I will explain that in a second. Currently, the usage or the minimum that they're looking at is about a 690 score and a 30% debt to credit ratio. This happened after the housing market. And the reason for this is that people, what they did was at the time, you were able to dispute an item. And I know a lot of people say, well, if I dispute it, isn't it frozen or doesn't get taken off? No, it used to be you disputed an account, which is, and by the way, each account is called a trade line. So if I have a Bank of America card, a Discover, whatever else, each one is a trade line, and the information is provided by a furnisher of information. That's how the law, the statute identifies. So now what we have is a situation where I have these accounts on there, and so when I'm calculating scores, the scores are a mix of all these different accounts. There's a formula that's used, you know, the secret formula that FICO doesn't share with anyone. And it's broken down this way. 35% of your score is calculated on your payment history. And your payment history is when I make the payment, as long as I'm within the time frame. So if you have one 30-day late and you're otherwise completely clean on all your payments, you're going to show like about a 98, 99% payment history, which is very good. It's when it gets down into the 70s, 80s, it's not good. That means that you're not vigilant, you're late all the time. If you have a situation where you have one 30-day late float out there, you missed a payment, whatever else it is, I always recommend to people, call up the account. If it's Bank of America, call them up and say, hey, listen, I apologize. You know, I know a year ago or 6 months ago I missed a payment. It was my screw up with my wife. You know, you can see I'm vigilant all the time and everything else. And you approach it that way, where they look and they say, hey, you know, otherwise clean is just one thing. You know, they'll say, okay, that's an acceptable excuse. We will not consider it as a 30-day late. We'll change it now. They're changing something, and you say, but wait a minute. The law says that they have to report accurately. It has to be truthful, accurate information. Why are they changing that if it's really not? Well, no, you told them and you gave them a reasonable explanation. They're changing it. Because what we're doing is the law says that if you report something, it has to be accurate. If it's not accurate, then it needs to either be removed or changed. And if you don't do that, then you are entitled as a consumer to go after them either one of two ways: reporting them to the FTC, which is effectively spitting into the Grand Canyon and hoping that it fills up the river, or two, filing a lawsuit either individually or as a class action to get them to stop reporting something inaccurately. Now, we don't know if it's the creditor or the furnisher of information that's screwing up, or if it's the credit bureaus that's screwing up. They could both be screwing up or not. But the law says that the credit bureaus cannot parrot information. In other words, I dispute an account. I say, this is not right. My balance is wrong. You show me 30 days late. That's not accurate. Whatever the information is that I'm disputing. And there's a number of things. I send a dispute to the credit bureaus. The credit bureaus say, we are going to undertake an investigation. They have 30 days to investigate. They contact the credit bureau, or the creditor or the furnisher. This is done by somebody sitting at a desk in the Philippines, in Dominican Republic, in Panama, in wherever it is. And on average, 75 seconds is dedicated to reviewing your dispute and putting it into a 3-letter or 3-number code that is forwarded ahead to the furnisher, like Bank of America, that says, not my account, wrong name, wrong balance, whatever it happens to be, they send that off. The furnisher gets that. They take a look, they go back and review their records within 30 days. They take a look and go, and they respond back. They say, nope, that is the correct person. Nope, that's the correct balance. Whatever it is, if they come back and they report back to it, then what you get is a response from the credit bureau that's either changing it. The credit bureaus themselves can remove it if they feel that the explanation they get is not reasonable, or they come back and say, nope, this is accurate. It's been confirmed by the original creditor. At that point, you now have, it's kind of the triggering agent at that point on a dispute for you to now move forward and seek redress if need be. Prior to that, doesn't matter, and I'll get to that in a second.
Okay,
Getting
Paul,
back to the,
sorry. Just since you're not, on the screen, I just want to make sure we're on the right part. I
go
have
to
right.
the makeup of the credit score.
Okay.
There's a pie graph, pie chart. Everything else, by the way, that's in there, you can read. It's an interesting story to follow along. I'm trying to hit highlights here because I want to get to the practical point soon. But if you go to the pie chart that says how credit score factors come into play.
Yes.
Okay, so this is what it boils down to, quite simply. 35% of your score is the payment history, the 30-day late, the 90 days, everything else. The next one, which is the most critical, is your debt to credit ratio, meaning how much available credit do you have and how much debt do you carry? Because just because you carry debt doesn't mean it's bad. There's good debt and there's bad debt. Somebody that has no debt whatsoever, you would think would have a great score, and that's not the case, because that means you're not playing the credit game. And the banks and the lenders are not making money off you because there's no interest floating around and all the other stuff. So some of you may remember back in the day that you used to be able to put on your tax return your interest paid on your credit card. You used to be able to write that off. That's no longer the situation anymore. But the banks still benefit from it. That's the vig that they make in lending you money. So 30% of your debt to credit ratio is what is relevant. I told you before, it used to be 50%. That changed after the housing meltdown, because what happened was people would dispute an account, and at the time, once an account was disputed, meaning it was not considered as part of your score, like it didn't exist. So if I dispute all of my negative accounts, and I got 9 of them, and they're frozen, it's not calculated in my score, and I have one open account that's positive, my score is going to look ridiculous because it's based on that one account. And what happened was people created a window of opportunity for themselves where their score looked great. And they qualified for mortgages and other things that they otherwise shouldn't have. And so the housing industry was lending money and giving mortgages to people that could never even afford to pay them. And so they stopped that. Now, if you dispute an account, there's two responses. Either your score will not be calculated, or nobody will lend you money unless the dispute is resolved, or you remove the dispute. So you say, hey, I'm filing a dispute, that's really good. Yeah, you're in limbo land. You can't do anything unless you either stop disputing it or resolve it. And on your account, it'll say disputed by consumer. So you got to be careful with something like that. It's got to be for a purpose. What they're trying to create is actual damages, not nonsense. So how do we deal with the 30% debt to credit ratio? It's real simple. Each account is its separate entity, but then they're all calculated. So let's say you have 5 credit cards. Each card is its own beast, and then they are within the framework of being credit cards. Now you have a mortgage, and now you have a car loan, and an installment loan. All these different things, they're within their own category. So first it's the individual account, then it's the account within its category, and then it's everything combined. And again, how it's calculated, don't know. So what you want to do is, obviously an installment account where I'm paying a car loan, if I haven't paid 30%, if I haven't paid 70% of the car loan, that's not impacting me. It's an installment loan. They're looking at payment history. I paid that every month. Everything's clean. Everything's good. They don't care what the balance is versus what I borrowed. It doesn't matter. On a credit card, that's where it makes a difference. So if there is a credit limit and a balance amount, and that is more than 30%, that's going to hurt me. So let's say I got 5 credit cards. I have 0 balances on 2 of them, and the other 3 I have 70%, 80%, 60%, whatever it is. If I can kind of balance them out where I can borrow against one card if necessary to raise it still under 30%, and bring another one down by paying the money towards that one, that's where I want that balance. I want everything under 30. Now, the government, there's a thing called the CFPB, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. If you know anything about Elizabeth Warren, she was the one that started it years ago. It was her baby, and it's the consumer watchdog against not only banks and institutions like Wells Fargo or Chase, who they spanked a number of times, but also against companies that do credit repair and debt, consolidation, all the other stuff. So they're a total watchdog for consumers. They have been trying to get legislated 680 as the score that is a bottom line and 40% debt to credit ratio. They have not been successful as yet, but that's where they're striving for. 30% is unreasonable, 50 is as well, 40 seems to be the fine thing in the middle. They got to get Congress to approve it. Okay, so those are, as you can see, 65% of your score. The next thing, 15% of it, is the length of your credit history. Your credit history is based on how long you had each account and how long you've had it in total. So you get brownie points for having an account that's 10 years old, and it doesn't help you to have one because they're always looking for something in about the 5 to 6 year range, overall. That's what makes a big difference to them. And then the other thing is you want to have a nice mixture. 10% of your score is installment loan, revolving, consumer finance, like I mentioned. If you can get a mortgage on there, great. If you got a car loan on there, great. If you got credit cards, if not, it's only a total of 10%, no matter how good or bad it is. So bear that in mind. That's why people can have good credit without having a mortgage or without having a car loan. You can still have great credit, but it just means that their debt to credit ratio is going to be that much more relevant. And then finally, 10% is credit searches. That's what we call either a hard pull or a soft pull. And I'm going to give you a little caution here. When you go somewhere, for example, you go to a car dealership, you want to buy a new car, and you have them look, they're searching at a different bank. You have to tell them up front, listen, after you go to the first institution, you need my permission to go elsewhere, because they'll shop you to 10 different places. And there's a reason for that. Number one, it's callous to do it, because you walk out and they say, no, I'm going to go to a different dealer. They dinged you on 10 different, it may be 10 points. That's 100 points that you've suffered because they shopped you around. Or it may only be 3 or 4 points, depending on your overall score. Either way, every time that you do a hard pull, and it stays on there for 2 years. So if you try to dispute that and say, I never gave permission, if you went to the dealership and you gave them carte blanche, then you're going to run into a problem. So you've got to be vigilant. Don't let people come out with your credit without you giving permission to do so. So that's, and what happens is it's supposed to come off. Typically, it'll stay on. They get lazy. I always send disputes, and I make sure I dispute every one of them, because sometimes they'll just take it off. If it's, let's say, a year and a half, they may remove it. Or if they can't, if they can't get validation for it for some reason, because sometimes there may be 2 or 3 times that it's listed on there, or maybe the car dealership went back and forth to the bank and it's listed on there 2 or 3 times. So, there's ways of playing with it where maybe they say, oh, multiple accounts, let's remove 1 or 2 of them. Little tricks that kind of help on that level. So that's how a credit score is calculated. And that's the makeup of it and everything else. So let's get real quick to disputes, if you will. That's, I guess, slide K, reasons for disputes, if you want to throw that up there.
Yeah, we talked about all of these. K, types of accounts and disputes.
Types of accounts. Yeah, that just goes to show you the different types of accounts that we're dealing with. And those are accounts because if let's say you go and apply for a mortgage, and they say your score stinks, you got like a 640, we can't allow it. What are you talking about? And you go back and you dispute it, and there's misinformation on there, and you dispute it, and it gets removed, and your score shoots up to 720. And you go back and you say, I want the mortgage, and you lost the house, or now all of a sudden they're not going to give you the mortgage, whatever it is, you suffer damages. But the problem is the damages that you suffered came before the dispute. You cannot go against a credit bureau or furnisher for that misinformation, because anything prior to a dispute, they are not liable or responsible to you in a civil action. So the triggering agent is the dispute. Whatever happens after that, they're accountable for. But prior to that, they're not. And unfortunately, most people learn that there's a problem with their credit report at the time they apply for something and get it turned down. So this is relevant for what we do. So a good consumer attorney, somebody that works a lot with the Fair Credit Reporting Act, understands that there's a Supreme Court case that came out that said you can't just file a lawsuit because this is what we used to do. We would file a dispute, they didn't change it, they didn't do whatever, it was misinformation, and they're not responding. So you file a lawsuit, and the knee-jerk reaction was, they said, hey, listen, we don't want to go through the suit. What if we remove it from the credit report? Is that okay? Yeah, fine. And we got it done. The problem is that we were using it as a vehicle to get them to take an action that they should otherwise do. Well, of course, with their influence from Congress, they went in and now the court says, no, you can't file a suit. If you file a lawsuit for misreporting on a credit report, there better be some damages in the back end, because if you're going to tie a federal court and put through a jury and go to the judges and everything else, and it turns out that there is no meat on that bone, you potentially could owe the attorney's fees for the other side. It's not frivolous, it's just a misappropriation of the federal court system. So we have to be vigilant that there has to be some kind of damages. Now, if you lost out on a mortgage to begin with and then you disputed it, we don't have damages. We know that. So we have to go and recreate. And that's how we're pretty good at it. Those are shop secrets that I'm not willing to share in this juncture because we don't have time. But I can just tell you that it's relevant in terms of you want to know that you have some bullets in the gun. If you're going to point the gun at a credit bureau or a furnisher, you got to make sure that you at least got one bullet in there, and so the threat is real. So now you dispute to the credit bureaus. It also, by law, allows you to also dispute it to the furnisher. You're putting them on notice. You're saying, here's a letter to you, I'm telling you, because they now have their own independent action. They must accurately report it to the credit bureau when you put them on notice that, hey, this account is wrong. But it's done in conjunction with the dispute to the credit bureaus. So we go through that whole process. We have things that we explain, the reasons provided and everything else. And then we have to see what the response is. You as the response, even if I'm representing a consumer, the response will go to that consumer because I'm telling the credit bureaus, report back to this person. And the reason for that is these idiots, when they get a letter from me and they take my address from my firm, and all of a sudden they transpose that address onto the consumer report. So now you might have my office address, which is insane, but that's what they do. Or we have situations where, let's say you're a junior or you have a similar name to your father or somebody else, and the next thing you know, you're having the information from their report merged onto yours. When they are entitled to accuracy based on a 50-mile radius of where you live, which can be 7 of the 9 digits of a social security number, not in consecutive order, mind you. 7 digits in that social security number that are the same as somewhere else. An address that looks similar. Different information. So that's why you always want to be vigilant to check the report. You'll see sometimes there'll be addresses on there. You go, wait a minute, I never lived at that address. Wait a minute. So you always want to clean it up. That's more housekeeping in the sense that it doesn't help your score by correcting it. It's not material. But you want to get rid of it because of the potential that it can cause you problems down the road by being on there. So now what we do is we file a dispute and we say, hey, this is not right, this is not accurate, this is what the situation is, and they report back and you have it, and then you have to decide what's going on. Hey, this is on my report, it shouldn't be on there, what the heck's the story? Now we get to the situation where you have rights to go and proceed with a lawsuit, and there are components to how that works out. People like to go online and file a dispute online. I strongly recommend that you don't do it. You want a paper trail. So unless you're taking a screenshot and getting a response, whatever it is, you don't want to do that, because if it gets to the point where you have to file suit, I need documentation. I have a letter. And typically I'll send a letter with a return receipt, so I know that the credit bureau of the furnisher got it, or something where I have appropriate documentation. Because without it, it'll seemingly get lost in the shuffle. It's amazing how when we do discovery in a suit, how quickly stuff disappears. The value of when we were filing suit against TransUnion, and the reason we worked out the deal with them, the deal was, we will not bring you into any lawsuits unless it's so egregious we have no choice. In exchange, you are going to provide us with the information on the ACDV. That to us was valuable information, because where they were playing this 3-card Monte, shuffling, the coconuts with the P underneath it around so that we could not get to it, they were giving me what the other bureaus were dealing with. And I was getting the response from the furnisher. I knew from their providing me with information without having to go through the discovery process, I knew who the responsible party was. So that meant that I could kind of play a game of chicken with the other ones, ultimately let them out, and then just isolating the one party. Now, here's some tricks that we use. Yeah.
I'm going to have to cut you off a little bit. We have 3 more minutes.
Okay.
And I have a question as well. So if you want to try to wrap it up.
Yes. So what I'm suggesting is that there are options available. The information that's on there, you need to take a look at. We have things with regard to the coronavirus that's impacting the scores. It's going to dramatically impact what's on Consumer Reports. There's going to be things put on there, but there are also allowances because people have lost their jobs, whatever else it is. I recommend that you always, at least the first step is to contact the account, and let them know what the situation is. Try and buy time, try and be reasonable, whatever else it is. As far as other things that we're looking at, our credit scores are going to be dramatically impacted over time. People can be vigilant, but they also need to check them on a regular basis. Credit Karma or a request to the credit bureaus, and just keep an eye on what's going on. As far as shameless plug here, I'm a member of the National Association of Consumer Advocates. We're everywhere around the country. There are guys that are very well versed in handling these things, that are always willing to dispense with some information and advice on how to handle things. Try and figure out a way that you can incorporate this in your business or with your clients, where you can be helpful in terms of providing information to them and moving forward with it, and know how it helps you. Because obviously, if you're trying to sell something to somebody and you need their credit to be good, you want to help them as much as possible in order to complete your sale or do what you need to do. So it's always very relevant. My information is contained. You want to send me an email, you want additional materials, questions, whatever else, I'm more than available to help out anybody. So, Tanya, do you have any questions that are sitting there?
Yes, I have one question that says, but sometimes you have to shop around for better rates. Do they look at the type of credit request in a certain time period as one or individually?
They really don't. It's never differentiated between, let's say you go on the same day, you shop around to 10 different places. Those are 10 different accounts. So yes, you want to shop around, but you really want to be kind of vigilant in terms of how you're going about doing it. You can't really stop it. If you're doing it yourself and you're going to 3 different banks, those are 3 different. The thing that you got to be careful of is when somebody is shopping for you, is you need to be the one to say, no, cut it off, 2 times, 3 times, whatever else it is. Otherwise, no, it really doesn't matter. The dates don't. A lot of times I'll have them and I can see that they were shopping for mortgage on 5 accounts and they're all reporting on the same day. So typically that's a 2 to 3 point being on your credit report is again, it's called a hard pull, as opposed to you looking at your credit report, which is a soft pull, and you're required and you're entitled to it without it costing you any points.
Okay. Thank you so much, Paul. If we have any more questions, this is the time to put them in the question and answer section. Otherwise, this concludes our presentation. I hope you found value, And if you have any questions, Paul's information and my information is on your screen. You're welcome to contact any of us. And as far as charges, I just got a question. That depends on your own situation. So you would have to contact Paul at consumeradvocatelaw.com or give him a call, and I'm sure he'll be more than happy to discuss your situation and how much it would cost to fix that.
Sure, and you don't have to couch it as I'm asking for a friend.
Difference between your offering and Paul. Paul is the credit repair attorney. If you have any credit issues, you need to talk to him. I am happy to help answer some questions, refer you to Paul. I'm a business attorney, not a credit card attorney. I'm just trying to help people navigate through these days. And I know there's going to be some issues with credit reporting coming up in the next few months. So I wanted to bring Paul in to kind of give you some information as to what you need to do, how to monitor, and if you need him, his information is there. All right.
So thanks again. I really apologize for the screw up. I don't know what's going on. I'll take a look. Thanks again, Diane.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.